Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Tzitzis, and in today's share we'll be learning Mir Hashem Daf Yud Tes Amid Aleph. We begin on Yud Ches Amid Beis, bottom line in the Shulchan Aruch, Siman Yud, Sif Yud Aleph, where we continue to speak about different types of begadim and whether or not they are chayiv in tzitzis and why. Says the Mechaber in Sif Yud Aleph, bottom line, Yud Ches Amid Beis, Sudar, a scarf or a shawl, shenoistin al hatzavar, that was placed around the neck or over the neck, draped over the neck. B'malchus Eretz Yisrael, this is something that was commonly worn in Eretz Yisrael. Shenikra ba'arvi shid, this is some type of a scarf or shawl that was known in Arabic as a shid. V'chein, similarly, bika, Shahayu noistin bisvarad al kispehem, a garment known as a bika, which was also some kind of a shawl or a throw that was draped over the neck and the shoulders. Piturim, these garments are potter from tzitzis. Okay, says the Mishnah Berurah is cut in Lamedalad on Yutes Amid Aleph. Piturim, these garments are potter from tzitzis. Now, very critical what the Mishnah Berurah says here. Af shahaya machzik oisa chaticha ka'ama oy amosayim, even though this piece of fabric, this garment, was either an amma by an amma or 2 amos by 2 amos, and therefore certainly the yesh kidei lechasais roishay verubai shal katan, it meets the minimum requirements of the shiur of tzitzis. For a garment to be chayiv in tzitzis, it is big enough that it could cover roishay verubai, the head and the majority of the body of a child, and therefore, based on its size, it should certainly be chayiv in tzitzis. Afilu hachi peturim, still in all, this style of garment is potter from tzitzis. Why? So the Chavetz Chaim does not tell us why here in the Mishnah Berurah. He says, Va'ayin b'bir halacha, take a look at the bir halacha, dibur hamaschil sudar. So, indeed, we are going to go right away near the bottom of Yud Ches Amid Beis, Bir Halacha Divrei HaMaschil Sudar Shenoistin V'chulei Peturim. This type of garment, this style of garment is potter from tzitzis. Ayin b'Mishnah Berurah, the Chavetz Chaim in the Bir Halacha says, take a look at the Bir Halacha in the Sif Katan Lamed Daled, where I told you to come look at the Bir Halacha. V'atam lozeh. As far as the explanation, why are these types of garments potter and tzitzis? Again, it seems to be a beged, and it's something which meets the minimum size requirement to be chayiv and tzitzis. So why is it potter and tzitzis? Says the Chavetz Chaim in the Bir Halacha, V'atam lozeh, the reason for this, Kosev b'Beis Yosef, it's written in the Beis Yosef, she'ikar, and we're going to see the Beis Yosef gives several reasons why these types of garments are potter. First, the Chavetz Chaim tells us, she'ikar havas hasudarim hahem mitchila, the main reason why somebody wears this style of a sudar, hu kedei lehisatef bahem svivos harosh mipnei hakar. Originally, what these garments were intended as was for a wrap to wrap over or around the head for protection from cold. Velasos tseil al harosh, or to provide shade over the head, bizman hachoim, during the summer months. Vegam lechasais baharosh bahachatichais abeged. Also, what this sudar was used for, it was draped around the neck and over the shoulders to be available as a head covering. Be'ez shehu oila likrei b'Torah. If somebody got an aliyah and he wanted to cover his head, so he had this beged that was draped around his neck or over his shoulders, and he took a piece and he flipped it over his head. So what the Beis Yosef is telling us over here is, what was this garment intended for? We're discussing a garment which is draped over the neck, over the shoulders, and we're wondering why it's not chayiv in tzitzis. Says the Chavetz Chaim, quoting the Beis Yosef, you have to analyze what this beged was originally intended for. And the Beis Yosef says this beged was originally intended as a head covering, either for protection from cold, or for protection from the sun, or to be available to use as a head covering if you got an aliyah, or for something else that you wanted to cover your head for. Therefore, says the Chavetz Chaim, again quoting the Beis Yosef, even though for the majority of the day a person would be wearing this draped over his neck and shoulders, in essence, it is really intended and it is really considered to be a head covering, not a garment for the body, upater, and therefore it's pater. Why is it pater? Because of what we learned yesterday in Sif Yud. In Sif Yud we learned mitznefes petura, a turban is pater, and the Mechaber told us the reason it's pater is because we learned from a pasuk. The pasuk says, Gedilim tasalach al arba kanfais kisusecha. The Torah Dirshu tells us that we have to place tzitzis on the four corners of our garment, kisusecha. And the Mechaber said in the bottom line of Yud Ches Amud Beis, kisusecha amarachmana. The Torah Dirshu tells us that your ksus, your garment, is chayiv in tzitzis, v'loi ksus haroish, but not a hat, not a head covering. A head covering is not chayiv in tzitzis. So therefore, says the Chavetz Chaim from the Beis Yosef, you want to know why these types of shawls and scarves are pater? Because shuv havalei kisos roish, because in essence they are head coverings, not garments, upater, and therefore they're pater. So that's the first reason that the Biur Halacha tells us why these styles of begadim are pater and tzitzis. V'oid, furthermore, says the Chavetz Chaim, v'oid yesh loymar, we can also say she'ikar havois hasudarim hahem, that really the ikar intent of these begadim is not even necessarily as a head covering. As a matter of fact, says the Beis Yosef, these garments might not be considered begadim at all. They might not be considered clothing. Why? The main point and intent of these types of sudarim, these shawls and these scarves, they were really multi-use garments. They used these as belts if they were carrying something. You ever go into a warehouse and you see these people that wear these like big belts to give support to their backs when they're carrying? So people had this kind of a sudar around their neck and shoulders. And when they had to carry something, they took it and they tied it. They used it as a belt to support their back. Or, lekanech behemes hayadayim, they also kept this available around their neck and shoulder to have something to wipe their hands if they had a need to wipe their hands. V'litzrar behem mois, or if they had to wrap up coins, they used it to wrap up coins. Ulahavi behem peros, they also used it as a shopping bag. You know, nowadays we have the plastic shopping bag ban, and we always forget to put the ShopRite bag in the back of the car. So they had this sudar that they could use to carry some potatoes home. Ulakaneh chazeya, or to use it as a bandana. They could use it to wipe the sweat off the forehead. So this was like a kind of like a multi-purpose piece of fabric that they carried around with them during the day, draped around their neck and draped over their shoulders. But it wasn't really an article of clothing. So says the Chavetz Chaim, even though it's true that during the summer months when it's hot outside, you did get hana from this piece of cloth because it did provide you shade. And it's true that if you got caught outside in the rain, you could use it to cover your head and get protection from the rain. But since this is not why you're actually wearing it, loy chashiva, it's not considered a beged. V'loy karina nasher techasepa. We don't consider this a kesusacha, a garment asher techaseba that you use to clothe yourself with, and therefore it's not chayiv in tzitzis. So okay, so far we have over here from the Chavetz Chaim and the Biur Halacha, based on the Beis Yosef, two rationales why to exempt a sudar from a chiyuv of tzitzis. One is that really, essentially, it's a head covering. And we learned in Sif Yud that a head covering is pater and tzitzis. Reason number two, it might not be considered a beged at all, because really it's like a multi-purpose piece of cloth that you carry around with you. It's a Swiss Army knife of cloth, but it's not essentially a beged. So that's the two reasons we have so far. Says the Chavetz Chaim, continuing the Bir Halacha, Velazah Tama Achroin, and it is to this latter reasoning that it's not considered a beged at all. Mashma she'eskimu HaMagen Avram. It's implied from the Magen Avram that the Magen Avram agreed to this latter rationale. Vahagra, and also the Gra, shehetikuhu b'Berurah, because both the Gra and the Magen Avram cite this rationale in their Pirushim. Now, continues the Chavetz Chaim, and he says something very interesting. Ulefizeh, now based on these two rationales that we just had, Ulefizeh nira, according to this, it would seem, b'mekaimenu, in our regions, shenispashet bechodosh gamkein, that it recently became the minig, laha'alois kimin chaticha gedola, to carry around a big piece of fabric, shel amma v'yoser, that was either an amma by an amma or even more, alak safayim, it became common to carry one of these around over the shoulders. Ve'ein bazeh shum tam me'ela ha'ta'amim kivi sheyadu alanu. And the reasons that the Chavetz Chaim just brought from the Beis Yosef to exempt it from tzitzis doesn't seem to apply to this piece of beged that they were carrying around in the days of the Chavetz Chaim. So the Chavetz Chaim saying, in his day, it became the minig that people draped one of these sudarim around their neck and over their shoulders, and the rationale that given by the Beis Yosef to pater it from tzitzis didn't apply. It wasn't intended as a head covering, and it wasn't this type of Swiss Army knife type of towel either. So the Chavetz Chaim is saying, if those are the two reasons to pater a sudar from tzitzis, in that case, says the Chavetz Chaim, it doesn't seem to apply to the garment, to the type of sudar that people were carrying around in his day. Again, inside, he says, according to these two reasons that we just brought down from the Beis Yosef, nire, it would seem, b'mekaimenu, in our regions, shenispashet min chadosh, where it recently became the minig gamkein, lahalois kimin chaticha gedola shel amma v'yoser alak seifayim, it became the minig to carry around a large piece of cloth on the shoulders. Ve'ein bazeh shum tam me'ela ha'ta'amim kivi sheyadu alanu, and as far as we know, the rationales to pater it from tzitzis given by the Beis Yosef don't apply to that piece of cloth. So in that case, shechayiv b'tzitzis. So it would seem, says the Chavetz Chaim, that type of sudar that people were carrying around in his day should be chayiv in tzitzis, because the reasons given by the Beis Yosef did not apply. However, l'taimim acherim shehevi beVeis Yosef, the Beis Yosef gives additional reasons besides these two reasons why they might be pater in tzitzis, and according to those reasons, the efshir. What are those reasons? First of all, the efshir, it's possible the dafka derech levisha, when the Torah Dirshu was bechayiv somebody to put tzitzis in a beged, it's only a garment that you wear, v'loy ha'alah, not a beged that is just draped over you, and we'll explain that in a minute. So that's one reason the Beis Yosef gives. The Beis Yosef says another possible reason to exempt a sudar from a chiv of tzitzis is because it's not derech levisha. That's not called wearing something. That's just called having something draped over you. And it's possible that derech halah, something that's only draped over the body, is not chayiv in tzitzis. So that's one possible reason. Another possible reason to exempt a sudar, says the Beis Yosef, is that what is a beged? A beged is something which affords the body protection. It could be protection from cold, protection from hot, protection from rain, but it's something that provides the body with protection. These sudarim were not worn to provide protection. They were worn for kavod. They were a dignified garment. So the Beis Yosef puts out the idea, maybe the reason these begadim are pater in tzitzis is because we don't wear them for protection. We wear them only for dignity, for kavod, for honor. And such a garment is not chayiv in tzitzis. It's not worn for protection from cold or heat. Efshir diyesh lahakal. According to those reasons, says the Chavetz Chaim, it could be that even the sudarim that people had begun to wear in his day, they could be pater in tzitzis. So now, I just want to we got to keep the paper trail. We have over here so far 4 potential reasons. And this is very key. We have to keep this in mind. We have so far 4 potential piturim, 4 potential reasons why a sudar would be pater from tzitzis. The Mechaber says, sudar, pater from tzitzis. The Mechaber doesn't give a reason why. The Chavetz Chaim is giving us here 4 possible reasons from the Beis Yosef. The 2 main reasons that he gave us at first were, 1, these types of sudarim are intended as head garments, head coverings. And a kisei aroish, a head covering, is pater from tzitzis, as we have seen in Sif Yud. Reason number 2, it's possible that these sudarim are not considered begadim at all. Why would they not be called begadim? Because they're not really worn as begadim. The reason they're carried around is so that you should have a towel if you need a towel, you should have a belt if you need a belt, you should have a shopping bag if you need a shopping bag. So it's not really a beged. So either it's a head covering, or maybe it's not even a beged. Then we have another 2 reasons that the Beis Yosef gives. One is, you have to know why people were wearing this. First of all, it could be that they're only wearing it for kavod, for dignity. It's like an honorable beged. It's a dignified beged. In Cain, says the Beis Yosef, it could be that a beged that you only wear for kavod is not chayiv in tzitzis. It's very important to remember that possibility given by the Beis Yosef, because we're going to have to discuss that as we go on. Or, he says, another possible reason is that the only types of begadim that are chayiv in tzitzis are begadim that you wear derech levisha. You get dressed in them. You put them on. Not derech halah. Something that you wear derech halah that's only draped over the body is not chayiv in tzitzis. Now, what's the nafkamina? So the Chavetz Chaim said, if you go with the first 2 reasons, that either it's a head covering or it's not a beged. So the Chavetz Chaim said that in his day, people started wearing sudarim, and they were a beged. They weren't a Swiss Army knife, and they weren't intended as head coverings. So, according to the first 2 reasons, they should be chayiv in tzitzis. Says the Chavetz Chaim, according to the last 2 reasons, that they're only worn for kavod, or that they're only derech halad, not derech levisha, they would be pater. Just to finish off the bir halacha here, he says, Ach harbe cholkem al elu atamim. There are many who disagree with these latter 2 reasons. Kimevur beveis Yosef ubedarkei Moshe. Al kain, therefore, Yirei Shamayim yaseh keren achas agula. A Yirei Shamayim, if he's going to wear such a sudar, should round off one of the corners, so it's not a 4-cornered beged. Now, before we go weiter, I just want to read something to you from the Dirshu. There's a Dirshu footnote. It's Dirshu footnote number 27, and it's the 2nd paragraph in the footnote. The Bir Halacha quotes to the Beis Yosef this possibility that maybe only a garment that's worn derech levisha is chayiv in tzitzis, but derech halah is pater in tzitzis. Now, on a very high level, the difference between levisha and halah is that levisha means it's a garment that's worn on the guf. Halah means it's only draped over the guf. Now, a very common example given of derech halah is a blanket. You don't wear a blanket. You lay down in bed and you cover yourself with the blanket, so the blanket is definitely covering your guf, but no one is going to say that you're wearing a blanket. You're not wearing the blanket. It's just draped over you. As opposed to a jacket, you wear a jacket, you wear a shirt. But what is the precise difference between levisha and halah? How could we magdir it a little bit tighter? So in the 2nd paragraph over here, Dirshu footnote 27, he says here, Ubechilik bein halah levisha. When it comes to drawing a distinction between what's called halah and what's called levisha, kasav ha'ayelas ha'shachar shahagidorim bekachem she'im ha'guf machzik es ha'beged. If the guf is supporting the beged, nikra levisha, then it's called levisha. Avalim eina beged tafus beguf. If the beged is not grabbed by the body, it's not being held by the body. Elarak munach alav is just resting on him, kamaisadin like a blanket shebiskasa by bishchiva. A kippah she'al roshai, or like the yarmulke on your head, or the hat on your head, your body is not holding the hat. The hat is resting on the body, but the body is not machzik in it. The body is not holding on to it in any way. The body is not holding on to the blanket. The Ayelos HaShachar says that's the difference between halah and levisha. Now, we might struggle a little bit to understand if that's the case. How about our talisim? Is the guf machzik in the talis? So I was thinking it might depend on how you put the talis on. You know, if you just take the talis and drape it over your head, it could be that that's taka derech halah. And in Chinami, when we make a bracha on our talis, we don't just make the bracha and then drop it on our head. We take the bracha and then we wrap it. We wrap it around us. Maybe that makes it more that the guf is machzik in the talis. But in any case, these are some factors that we have to keep in mind. Now, there's some of you might already be thinking, based on what we've discussed already since the beginning of the shiur, some of you might have a bomb kasha on some of what we just read here in the Biur Halacha. If you do, so hold on to the thought for a couple of minutes because we're going to get to it. Let's go now to Sif Yud Beis. Sif Yud Beis, second line down, Yud Tes Amud Aleph. Malbushim shebimitzrayim, the Egyptian garments, hanikraim guchash, that were called guchash. No idea what they are. V'chein mintini, or the mintini, v'dolamnish, v'kaftanish, kaftanish sounds like a kaftan, upidinish shebetoigarma, or the Turkish pidinish. I don't know precisely what these garments are, but the Mechaber gives us a hint. He says, Afal pi sheyesh lem arba knafayim, although they are four-cornered garments, piturim, they are potter. Now again, the Mechaber doesn't really tell us precisely what these garments are. All he tells us is that they are four-cornered garments, and yet they are potter, but he doesn't tell us why they're potter. Let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah is cut lamed hey. Hatam afal pi sheyesh lehem, even though they have four corners, they are potter. Hatam ayin bebeis Yosef. As far as the rationale for this patur, he says, take a look at the Beis Yosef. So I took a look at the Beis Yosef, and the Beis Yosef seems to give us two reasons why these are potter. And remember, Beis Yosef, Mechaber, same person, Rabbi Yosef Kairoi. So, one reason that the Beis Yosef gives for the P'tur here in Sif Yud Beis is something that we already mentioned in the Biur Halacha. And that is, the Beis Yosef says that these were garments that were worn only for kavod. These were honorable garments. These were chashuv garments that a person wore as a sign of dignity, as a sign of kavod. But they weren't worn for protection. They weren't worn, in the words of the Beis Yosef, lahagein. They weren't worn to guard mitnei hachama, mitnei hakor, and therefore, says the Beis Yosef, perhaps they're not begadim. That doesn't meet the requirement of gedilim tasa lachal arba kanfei ksusacha. This is not really a ksus, it's only worn for kavod. But then he says another very fascinating reason. He says that these garments were very long, and if you would have to put tzitzis on them, the tzitzits would have to drag on the floor. Now, so what? Now, many of you are thinking, well, is the Beis Yosef saying that if the tzitzits are going to have to drag on the floor, that you can't put tzitzits on them because it's not pakavadik for the tzitzits? No. What the Beis Yosef says is, if you're going to have to put tzitzits on these very lengthy begadim, what's going to happen is the tzitzits are going to drag on the floor. You're always going to step on them, or they're always going to get caught in things, and they're constantly going to rip. And you're constantly going to be in a position where you can't wear your garment because it doesn't have kosher tzitzits, and you're going to have to fix it. So Yedem Anta Gedanishtik, you're going to have to fix your tzitzits. It could even be that it would be very common that during the day, while you're wearing your garment, suddenly your tzitzits would rip. Says the Beis Yosef, that does not meet the requirement of Drachei Darchei Noyam B'chol Nesiv Yisei Shalom. We know that the Torah Dirshu says the laws of the Torah, the halachas of the Torah, drachei darchei noyam, the ways of the Torah are ways of sweetness. The chol drachei, the chol nesiv yisei shalom. So says the Beis Yosef, it could be that this doesn't meet the requirement of darchei noyam. and therefore these begadim would have to be potter in tzitzis. Very interesting reason. Okay, now again, keeping this in mind, let's go weiter to Ois Katan Lamed Vav. Oh, we have to do the Ramah first. So again, the Mechaber said, these garments, they're four-cornered garments, but they're potter in tzitzis, and we gave these two possible reasons why that might be so. Now we have a Ramah. Says the Ramah, 3 lines down, end of the line. Hagah, says the Ramah. V'hu hadin, the same halacha would apply to Malbushim shel Galilois b'nei Ashkenaz u'Sfarad, the very common garments found in the regions of Ashkenaz and Sfarad, Spain, that they are also potter in tzitzis. Hoyel ve'ein kanfeihem asuyim sheyiyu shnayim lifneihem u'shnayim la'achareihem mechuvanim zu kineged zu peturim. Very interesting petur that the Ramah introduces us to over here. The Ramah says, we have learnt, if we go back to Siman Ches, oh, come on. Siman Ches Siv Dalet. Daf Yud Gimel Abed Beis. Siman Ches Siv Dalet. The Mechaber says, Machzir shtei tzitziyos lefanov. You're supposed to have 2 of the tzitzis in front of you, ushtayim la'achrav, and 2 of the tzitzis behind you, kedei sheyehei mesubav b'mitzvahs, so that you should be surrounded with the mitzvah of tzitzis. Okay, now the Mishnah Berurah over there, did not tell us why. Doesn't tell us why it is that you have to be surrounded. It doesn't tell us the makar for this. One very interesting makar for this is, I believe it's a medrash that says that by Kriyas Yamsuf, we know that the pasuk says V'hamayim lehem chayma miminam u'mismailam, that the waters formed walls, and what we know is that the water was flowing down and the water piled up. It stopped and it piled up. But the medrash says that there was water in front of Klal Yisrael, there was water behind Klal Yisrael. And the Medrash says that the Malach Gavriel came, and the Malach Gavriel told the water that was behind Klal Yisrael, don't let yourself go and drown Klal Yisrael coming from behind, because Klal Yisrael is going to have tzitzis behind them. They're going to throw tzitzis over their backs. So the tzitzis that were over the backs protected us from the mayim that was behind us. So we do have this kind of makar that is an Indian to have the tzitzis in front of you and the tzitzis behind you. So the Ramah is giving us a very interesting p'tur. The Ramah is saying, sometimes you have a 4-cornered garment, but both of the corners are in front of you. It's not like a talis cotton, where we have 2 in the front and 2 in the back, or the talis gadol. We have 2 in the front, we have 2 in the back. You can have a garment where you have 4 corners in front of you. Now, what would be a garment where you have 4 corners in front of you? So I'll give you a very, very simple case. I want you to imagine a shirt, okay? A shirt goes around your body, right? You put in your arms into the sleeves, you bring it around to the front, and it's opened from top to bottom. Now, let's make the shirt a little bit simpler. The shirt tails at the bottom, instead of it being the shirt being rounded, let's square off the shirt at the bottom, so that at the bottom in front of you, when you bring the 2 flaps of the shirt together, if you look at the bottom edge on both sides, there's a corner. So there you have 2 corners at the bottom of the shirt, and they're both located in front of you when you wrap the shirt around you to button it. Now imagine, let's simplify the shirt even. The tips of the corner of the collars might also qualify, but let's make the shirt simpler. Take the collar off and just make a round neck that terminates in a corner on each side. So now when you wrap the shirt around the front of your body, you have 2 corners up on top and you have 2 corners down at the bottom. So here you have a beged of 4 corners, but they're both in front of you. Says the Ramah, fascinating p'tur. The Ramah says that a 4-cornered garment that is not made to to have 2 corners in front and 2 corners in back does not qualify for tzitzis. Why? Because you're supposed to have 2 in the front and 2 in the back. If you don't have 2 in the front and 2 in the back, it doesn't qualify. Now, it's very, very interesting, but take a look at the Bir Halacha, Dibra Maschil Hoyel Ve'ein Kanfeim Asuyin. Says the Chavetz Chaim over here in the Bir Halacha, Ayin be Mishnah Berurah Mashe Ataktu is Divrei Darkei Moshe. We're going to get there, we're going to see the Mishnah Berurah. But the reason I bring this down is, the Kasav HaPri Megadim, the Pri Megadim writes, Im Kain, if what the Ramah is saying over here is true, then Beserdak, I have no idea what this Serdak is. Beserdak she'oisin chatoch lefanav legamri. This garment called a sardik, which is opened completely in the front, like the shirt that I described. Umitzat smoil chatoch gamkein, I don't know what that means. Ladas adarke Moshe ein ze chayiv betzitzis. According to the Ramah, something like a shirt that has 4 corners in the front is potter in tzitzis. Says the Pri Megadim, v'liftar legamri mishum ze ein nachon. Ramah, you're going to patter a 4-cornered garment. Why? You're going to patter it based on the fact that all 4 corners on the front, you're going to patter it legamri from tzitzits? Amidst Asema Daraisa, you're going to say that for this reason it doesn't need tzitzits? The Mashanu Tzrichet Shiyushtei Tzitzis Lefneim Ushtayim Lachareim, says the Pri Megadim, I would think that this halacha that we find, that you need 2 tzitzis in the front and 2 tzitzis in the back, ain't a me'ikr halacha. This is not me'ikr adin. Rak mitzvah ba'alma. It's only a mitzvah ba'alma. It's lechatchila. I mean, I told you we have a source, Malach Gavriel in the Medrash, but this is not a chiv me'ikr adin. So the Pri Megadim is mitama on the Ramah. You're going to patter such a garment, me'ikr adin, you're going to patter it completely from a chiv of tzitzis based on this? Lachein, therefore, says the Bir Halacha here, Kedei sheyischayiv b'tzitzis, yera lasei shnei knafais miyamin, ushtayim mismail, v'ruba yepasuach reva nira le'inayim. Okay, I'm not going into that. But I just really wanted to bring down the Pri Megadim to show you the kasha that the Pri Megadim asks on the Darkei Moshe. He's very astonished by this Darkei Moshe, that the Ramah is going to patter a 4-cornered garment legamri from tzitzis based on the fact that it can't have 2 in the front and 2 in the back. Now let's go to the Mishnah Berurah, Eis Katan Lamed Vav. Hoyel ve'ein kanfeim asuyin shiu shtayim lefneim ushtayim lachreim mechuvanim zu keneged zu p'turim. The Ramah said, since these garments are not made so that you should have 4 corners and it should be 2 in the front and 2 in the back directly opposite each other, for that reason, these malbushim, these types of begadim, are potter in tzitzis. Says the Mishnah Berurah. Tehine, ha-Beis Yosef Kasav. The Beis Yosef writes, Yesh ledaktek b'malbushim shalonu. And again, imagine the shirt that I described to you before. The Beis Yosef has a problem. The Beis Yosef says, Yesh ledaktek b'malbushim shalonu. We should take a hard look at our clothing. Sheyesh lehem shtei knafay samach letzavar, where we have 2 corners up at the opening for the neck, ushtei knafay samach la'aretz, and then 2 corners at the bottom of the opening of the garment, at the bottom of the garment. So l'chayra, says the Beis Yosef, all of our garments are 4-cornered garments. Lama ein matila behem tzitzits, and yet the widespread minig is not to have tzitzits on these garments. So the Beis Yosef is already bothered by this. V'tiritz al zeh kama tirutzim. And the Beis Yosef gives many answers for this. And we've already seen some of those answers. One answer is that the Beis Yosef was talking about garments that weren't really worn for protection from the elements. He was talking about garments that were worn for kavod, and that's why they didn't get tzitzits. Or because they were long and the tzitzits would drag on the floor. But, says the Mishnah Berurah, V'dacha isam Darkei Moshe. But the Ramah pushes away all of these reasons of the Beis Yosef. And it's very interesting what the Ramah says. And this is the Bam Kasha that I was referring to earlier. The Ramah says, wait a second. You're going to tell me that a beged that's only worn for kavod is potter from tzitzis? In order to be chayiv in tzitzis, it has to be worn for protection? How about the talis that we wear in shul? When we put on a talis in shul, is that for protection? Do we wear it for protection from the rain, for protection from the cold? We put it on because we're afraid the air conditioning is too high? We put it on because we're afraid the heat is too low? No, we put it on for kavod tefillah. We put it on for kavod tzibur. We put it on for the mitzvah. So we're not wearing it lahagain. So the Ramah asks a bomb kasha on the mechaber. He said, what? The mechaber. How do we make a bracha on a talis? Why does our talis have tzitzis on it? As far as the tzitzis dragging on the floor, the Ramah brings down the Gemara that many of us know, the Gemara in Gittin, from the Churban Gemaras, that talks about, I forgot his name, Ben Tzitzis HaKesis, the one who his tzitzis used to drag on the floor behind him, and they put them on pillows. So you see that there's no such thing that if it drags on the floor, you're not chayim in tzitzis. So the Ramah is very unhappy with the explanations given by the Beis Yosef. So again, the Beis Yosef was puzzling about these style of garments that have four corners, two at the top in the front and two at the bottom in the front. Why are they patur in tzitzis? He gives his reasons. The Ramah doesn't like the reasons. V'amar hu, continues the Mishnah Berurah. V'amar hu, so the Ramah says, tam lahaminig, the Ramah gives his own rationale. And he says, D'meyachar de mitzvah tzitzis hu lechatchila, sheyachzer shtayim lefanav u'shtayim la'acharav. Since, like we learned in Siman Ches, the mitzvah of tzitzis is, we're supposed to see to it that we have two in front and two in the back. U'malbushim shalanu heim kol arba kanfos lefanav, and our style of garments, the four corners are always in the front. V'i efshar lahalbishon b'inyan acher, there's no way to wear them in a different way. If we would have a shirt the way I described to you before, right? The way you wear a shirt is you bring it around to the front and you button it from top to bottom. You can't wear it a different way. Ein chayav in b'tzitzis. Since it is part and parcel of the mitzvah of tzitzis, says the Ramah, that two should be in front and two should be in the back, a garment that simply cannot be worn that way can't be chayav in tzitzis. V'zeu ma shekasav hoyel ve'en kanfei and asuyim, and this is what the Ramah means here when he says hoyel, v'kulei. Since it can't be worn that way, it's not chayav in tzitzis. U'malbe shekarin rak, some kind of a coat or a jacket, shemechuber l'mayla chatichas beged merubas, where at the top of the beged there was a square piece of fabric attached to it. Umunach al kseifav me'acharav, and it rested on the shoulders in the back of the neck. Shekarin kalner, and this was called a collar. Now, apparently what this is imagine you have a jacket, but the top of the jacket, instead of it all being one piece, the way that the jacket was kind of squared off in the back, and there was like a separate piece that went over this jacket, and it was square at the bottom in the back, so you had two corners in the back, and it draped over to the front, and the collar formed two corners in the front. So, says the Mishnah Berurah, this kind of garment, pashut hu de pater, this is certainly pater, shaharei l'tzad maila ein loy kanfais, at the top it doesn't have corners, rak kanfais akalna amunacham like tzas me'achayrav. It only has two corners really in the back where it's squared off. Ve'ein zeh kainois, hoyel ve'in hasheni kanusha me'achayrav, mechuvanois neged akanfais mishalafanav, since the corners on the back are not opposite the corners in the front, therefore this is pater. Hang on one second. Just want to look at something. Yeah. What he means by that is like this. You see the collar of my my robe, my chalat over here. This collar has no corners in the front, right? There's no corners here at all. This is all rounded. Now imagine this was attached behind me to a piece of fabric. It continued behind my neck, and it goes down in a piece of fabric that's squared off at the back. So that would mean that I have two corners behind me where, up by my shoulders, right? This piece would terminate right behind me, right behind my shoulders. So I would have two corners behind me. But where are the other two corners? They're not here. You know where the other two corners are? The other two corners are at the bottom of my robe over here. That's where the other two corners are. Here's one, and the other one is on the other side. Here's the other one. So therefore, says the Mishnah Berurah here, that again, using this same Torah as the Ramah, this would be potter in tzitzis, because Bal Karchai, the way this garment is made, I've got two corners that are attached all the way up here, and then two corners that are attached all the way down there in the front. So according to the Ramah, this is potter in tzitzis. Ad kan loshen Darkei Moshe, so says the Ramah in the Darkei Moshe. The Kosav Magen Avram, and the Magen Avram writes, Yan shehalacha zu roifefes bidei ha'go'onim. Since the Go'onim, this halacha was kind of weak by them. They didn't have a solid grasp or give a solid explanation of this halacha. V'lo matzu tam nachain, and we haven't found a real solid rationale for this p'tur. Ki gam al tam Darkei Moshe yesh lefakfek harbe. Again, we're continuing the same struggle as the Beis Yosef to figure out what is the p'tur of tzitzis for these garments that have four corners, either four corners that are all four in the front, or this coat that we just described that has the four corners right behind the neck and the four corners in the front by the bottom. So we have the rationales of the Beis Yosef, that it's only covered, it's not lahagein, that the tzitzis are going to drag on the floor. We have the rationales over here of the Ramah, that in order to be chayiv in tzitzis, it has to be that there's two in the front and two in the back, fairly opposite each other. We have the Pri Megadim's, you have the Ramah's kashas on the Beis Yosef, the Pri Megadim's kashas on the Ramah. So we don't seem to have a very clear explanation. Therefore, says the Magen Avram, Al Kain, Yirei Shamayim Yaseh Keren Achas Agula. Yirei Shamayim should see to it that one of the four corners should be rounded. K'moshe Kasav Beis Yosef B'Shem Hazakenim V'chein Dasa Pri Begadim U'Sha'arei Achreinim. U'Befrat B'Yameinu. Certainly in our days, Ba'osan HaBegadim U'Sha'nagu Mechadosh La'asoisan Pasuach Me'achareim. With those garments that we're going to describe momentarily, that they started making split and opened in the back. V'hu habeged hanikra kapota. A kapota. How does a kapota work? A kapota is similar, right? I'm wearing a robe right now. So a kapota also, I know you can't see my face, but you can see the robe, right? A kapota opens in the front. It buttons up, right? So here, the beged is split. And you have a corner down here. You have a corner down here. Now, in this robe, the entire back is all one piece. And over here, it's all round. So over here, you don't have a shaila of four corners. But imagine that the back of the kapata, which is the way kapatas are made, imagine if over here in the back, the garment was split so that it was cut from here going up. So that here at the bottom, you have another two corners, right? You have a corner here and a corner here. And indeed, that's the way a kapata is made. A kapata is split up the back from the bottom of the back, going up all the way to the middle, maybe even higher than the middle. Now that gives you two corners in the back, and then in the front, you have two corners at the bottom. And not only that, but they're mechuvin. They're opposite each other. You've got two corners in the back, two corners in the front. So says the Mishnah Berurah, such a beged, v'hu ha-beged ha-nikra kapata, u'matzihu kama pa'amim sherubai pasuach, and the slit up the back very often goes the majority of the way up. U'lefi divrei Darkei Moshe chayiv u'b'tzitzis. According to the Ramah, there's no p'tur here, because now the four corners, two of them are in the back, two of them are in the front, all four of them are on the bottom, and they're opposite each other. Sharei shtei knafei shel ha'acharav mechuvanois keneged shtei knafei shel ha'fanav. Al-Kain, therefore, haroitza lifter atzmai, if you want to be exempt from tzitzis on the kapata, mechuyev lasei sham al kalpanim kera achas me'oisen arba knafei sagula v'tiparta b'nat tzitzis. You have to make at least one of those corners rounded. So what they usually do is, in the back, they make at least one of those corners rounded, and you don't see it because where it's slit, the two sides flap over each other, and the rounded corner is covered. The yoiser toiv, even better, says the Mishnah Berurah, sheya'agel oid shtei kronos, you should round off another two corners, and I'll tell you what he means. Kedei shetishar rak bashalosh, so it should only have three corners, ki atihi bashisha, because now the kapot is really six corners. Why is the kapata 6 corners? Because you have the 4 corners at the bottom, right? Remember, the bottom of the kapata is split into a left and a right side. You've got 2 corners in the front, 2 corners in the back. But also up here by the lapels, you also have 2 corners. Now, those 2 corners, according to the Ramah, are not problematic because they're not opposite a corresponding 2 corners in the back. But says Mishnah Berurah, to be yaitza al shitas, round off 2 corners, or round off 3 corners, so that you should only have 3 intact corners left. You have to 2 in the front, 2 in the back. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Mizah loshen nimshach shkaga le'eza anoshim, from the lashon of the Ramah here, when the Ramah says that in order to be chayiv in tzitzis, you have to have 2 tzitzis in the front, 2 tzitzis in the back. Nimshach shkaga, a mistake has come out, le'eza anoshim, by some people, shemekapel in chelik echad me'atalis ma'oid, where they take their talis and they're mekapel, they scrunch it up very, very much, ad shenase dak, until they scrunch it all up from the back. So it's not draped along their back. They scrunch it up behind their neck until it's dak. It's very thin. Vein mechase klal rakatzavar. What they do is they take the talis and they scrunch up the entire talis so it's just around the neck. It's not draping anymore behind their back. And why do they do this? The kavanasam, their intent is sheyeh shtei tzitzis lachareim mamish al kispeim. What they're trying to do is like this. They put on their talis, and when they put on their talis, they have 2 tzitzits hanging right over here in the front. Now, typically when you put on a talis, it's shorter on the front than it is in the back. So they have usually you have like 2 tzitzits over here somewhere, and in the back you have 2 tzitzits down there somewhere. So what these people do is they take the whole back, they scrunch it up, and they bring it around their neck. So now the 2 back tzitzits are right behind their shoulders, and the 2 front tzitzits are right in front of their shoulders. So they have 2 in the front, 2 in the back, directly opposite each other. Where did they get it from? They got this mistake because they read the words of the Ramah. They were like tzedukim, they make the pasuk very literal. They made the Ramah very literal. They said, shiyu shnayim lifneim, ushnayim lachareim, michuvanim zu keneged zu. We got to measure, we have to measure. It's got to be directly opposite each other. Says the Mishnah Berurah, that's a talis. Vein zeh min hamuvchar. This is not right. This is certainly not min hamuvchar, says the Mishnah Berurah. Dem kain ain't kan kisei guf ele kisei roish, because now you're not using the talis to cover your body. Essentially, it's only covering your head. Kisei roish is patur and tzitzis. The yoser tov keminig hatogarmim. It would be better to follow the minig of the Turkish people. Shahayad mafsekes pachatzi atalis, where you put on the talis. I'm using a talis cotton here, but everybody's familiar, married people, with the way we wear a talis gadol, right? So the talis gadol drapes over your shoulder and over your arm. One set of tzitzis comes to the front, and the other set of tzitzis comes to the back. So says the Mishnah Berurah, the better should be shahayad mafsekes pachatzi atalis, that the arms are dividing the talis. Ba'ifin shemishnei tzadin yachas me'atzitzis lefanav v'chelik la'acharav. Did tzadin the lefanav v'la'acharav nami mikri lefanav v'la'acharav v'lachein dai behefsek hayad. All you have to do is just separate it by your arms, and that is good enough. I actually thought that we would start Siman Yud Aleph, but this is all very complicated, so we're going to stop over here. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. Discuss of limud HaTorah should be Megan and Gans Klal Yisrael. The Rosh Hashanah should send Yeshua's for force, Parnasa, and Shidduchim to all those in need, and we should be zeichet to see the B'yas Kal Tzedek, B'meher v'yameinu, Amen. Be well.